Hello, this is Cho of the Shiny Colors Discord, and welcome to another episode of The Shiny Review. Today we'll be talking about the latest banner starring the new SSR Chiyuki, as well as the SR Mano and the event SR Hiyori. If you want to hear my opinion of the banner before we really get started, I think it's fine. I don't know if it's necessarily worth going for broke over. Probably worth saving up your gems for anniversary, since we are not too far away. But with that all being said, let's see what makes this banner so interesting. Starting things off with Chiyuki. Chiyuki 4 helps solidify an interesting concept for visual Alstroemeria that might not be the most impactful in the current meta, but if this team gets at least one or two more supports, there could be a real threat here. She has a lot of investment required to make an impact, but the results might be surprising. Her combined vocal visual uncaps will be appreciated for mixed team builds, and her passives create a unique dynamic for Alstroemeria. She's not a go-for-broke unit like most of the SSR4 lineup, but she's worth considering if you're willing to go all in on the banner. Her roles are center, maybe, we'll get into that in a second, healer, damage cut, as well as regen. So what exactly does this Chiyuki do? Her initial skill is a vocal 3.0 that applies a mental damage cut of 20% for 2 turns, and links into a mental 15% regen, referred to in-game as relax, for 4 turns. At max, she gets a visual 4.5 appeal that applies a 30% mental damage cut for 2 turns, and links into the same mental regen of 15% for 4 turns. Her passives at 1 star unlocks a memory gauge 20% up as well as mental 20% heal, as long as a regen is active, has a 30% chance to activate once. Her 2-star passive is a memory gauge 25% up and mental 25% heal if you have an active damage cut, 40% chance to activate 1 time. Her uncap at 3 star is a vocal visual of 100, and her memory appeal at max is a visual 2.0 that scales based on how high your HP is, which links into an additional visual 2.0 that scales based on how high your mental is. The rest of her uncaps are visual focused, meaning that you will probably end up building her as a pure visual unit rather than as a vocal visual mix, though the option is still certainly there. For recommended supports, remember how in Amana 4's video we talked about the 3 keys to visual Alstroemeria? Well, the same holds true here, with a small twist. Because Chiyuki has passives that require regen or damage cut active abilities, if you choose a second appeal, you could opt for a card like SSR1 Chiyoko for her regen appeal, or you could pick something that's a little more traditional. Limited Meguru, because of her being a vocal visual card, actually does play into this card's specific stat niche very well, so grabbing her appeal might not be the worst idea. Also listed here is an event Kogane who has a damage cut appeal, which can be useful for your team as well. While we have the Illumination Stars core here as supports, you could also include Mamimi or the limited Tenka from last banner to really solidify a build for this Meguru. As for teammates, we have 2 setups this time, and they're sort of similar. We've got 2 options for what feels like the game plan for visual Alstro. The Amana 3 Center offers potential utility in creating several memory appeals in quick succession, with a little bit of luck. The latter opts for more damage through Chiyuki 4's Center, while still aiming to utilize her buffs. The second team is very weird, since Kogane 3 and Mamimi 2 are not the most ideal duo ever, but the idea of using Kogane's damage cut for 3 turns to activate that 25% buff is pretty good, and when you pair this up with what Alstroemeria wants to do, it doesn't sound like the worst idea ever. You could also opt for a more traditional team that utilizes Chiyoko and Rinzai together, but again, it all comes down to preference. So overall, Chiyuki gets an S+ as a center. A visual 4 memory appeal is pretty strong, and in some cases might be stronger than Amana 4. That being said, Amana 4 has better utility for the team with healing and memory gauge generation. If you want a possible one-shot variation of visual Alstro, this is a way to go. I don't know if it's necessarily the best right now, but depending on how the meta changes, if it changes at all, this Chiyuki might see more and more play. As a unit, she gets an A. I really like this trend of permanent SSRs being very usable. While I think her overall impact on the meta won't be super crazy till we maybe see a limited visual support Amana, wink wink nudge nudge, Chiyuki certainly has an interesting proposition for aspiring producers. Bonus points for all the fan art of her flying alongside her bike. Next we have the SR Mano. Our latest SR Mano is a bit of an interesting card. Her buffs only apply to the stats she doesn't attack with, and she tries to balance it out through all of her passives and memory appeal. That being said, all of it ends up being a little bit on the weak side. The easiest comparison to make with this is the limited SR Mano, who has a lot of the same quirks. However, that Mano has a much more effective buff for those off stats, even if it doesn't last as long as new Mano. Their memory appeals are pretty comparable, and this Mano's might be a little bit stronger. It's worth experimenting with for sure. Her roles are dual attacker as well as buffer. Mano's initial skill is a Vocal Dance 1.0 appeal that applies a 5-turn visual buff of 20%. This then links into an additional Vocal Dance 1.0 appeal. At max, she unlocks a Dance Visual 1.5 appeal that applies a 30% vocal buff for 5 turns, and links into a Dance Visual 1.0 appeal. At 1 star, she gains a Vocal Dance 10% buff if your mental is 74% or lower, a 40% chance to activate once. Her 2-star passive is a Dance Visual 20% up if the turn count is 3 or less, a 40% chance to activate once. Her 3-star is an uncap of 100 for Dance, and her memory appeal when maxed out is a Vocal Dance Visual 0.5 that links into an additional Vocal Dance Visual 0.5. For recommended supports, this might seem kind of familiar if you watched the New Year's Mano. Bring the core, build for dual stat. Illumination stars have the benefit, like Hokago, of being able to more or less use any support to provide some sort of damage or utility, so go wild with your strongest supports while building up your Marching Penguin. For recommended teammates, Mano's team setup is more or less identical to current Mano setups. Aim for attacking with your ideal stats while buffing up with Rinzai and Chiyuki. It's a pretty self-explanatory team. So we have Choko 1, you can choose between Rinzai 1 or Rinzai 3, Meguru 4 and Hiyori 4 or Hiyori 1. As a center, Mano receives a B+ grade. I think she's comparably strong to limited SR Mano, as mentioned before, so she gets the rough ballpark of B+, maybe B- nowadays. And yes, that does mean that limited SR Mano is down to a B+ from an A to A+ in the last video for her. We've seen all types of appeals perform well in the past, and in the present really, so this might hang in there as a very budget option for Illumination Stars players looking to get started. As a unit, C+. I really wish the buffs were just a bit stronger on this card. The appeals are also pretty lackluster for damage, so you're going to have to depend a lot on your teammates or alternate appeals to compensate. The fact that limited Meguru and Hiyori appeals are probably stronger on this Mano than her actual appeals is pretty telling. Lastly, we have Hiyori. This card is certainly a card. She offers an appeal idea for TFD, which is always nice. Ultimately, this Hiyori ends up feeling like a mashup of much better Hiyori supports, leaving this one to feel very underwhelming. Visual Mastery Mental is okay, because we don't have too many of those floating around. Otherwise, you're probably safe to use any other Hiyori support you've picked up over time. Her skills are Idol's Bond, Audition Mastery SP, Promise Recovery, Rest Boost, and Visual Mastery Mental. Audition Mastery SP reaches +4 at level 65, and Visual Mastery Mental reaches +6 at level 60. And as mentioned, her TFD idea is Appeal. As for what this Hiyori does, she has a visual 12% up if you're in the visual position, a 30% chance to activate once. Her 2-star passive is a visual 20% up if your star count is 10 or higher, 30% chance to activate once. Her uncap is a 50 to visual, and her 4-star appeal is a fast visual 2.0 that reduces the judge's influence by 10% for 1 turn. Remember that influence is equivalent to attack, so you're reducing any incoming damage from judges by 10%, but that will also technically benefit rivals. So Hiyori ends up with a C. The fast appeal will probably be useful for Collabofest when it comes around, not because it's fast, but because reducing all damage your allies take by 10% is pretty good. I think the card is specifically niche if you're building a visual team and feel like mental is your biggest issue. Probably good for Austrabaria, maybe not really sure. I can't really think of too many amazing utilizations of this Hiyori, other than maybe just using her for unit masteries from other Illumination Stars cards. And that's going to wrap things up for today. Thank you as always for watching. If you like what you saw, make sure to hit the like button and share the video around to let other people know what you're doing. And subscribe if you haven't already. Next time, we'll be talking about whatever banner comes next, or if we have other topics that feel like they're good for a video, we'll do our best to produce those for you. So, till next time, I've been Cho, thanks as always for watching, and have a wonderful rest of your day.